Welcome to Wellness for Entrepreneurs, where we have meaningful conversations with founders. This podcast is about exploring, educating, and empowering entrepreneurs on maintaining wellness in their entrepreneurial journey. My name is Mmathebe Zvobwo, and I am an entrepreneurship investor, scholar, and evangelist. I am your host. Entrepreneurial wellness is about maintaining an entrepreneurial mindset that allows entrepreneurs to spot new opportunities while carefully balancing out cognitive biases and managing emotions throughout this process. This is Wellness for Entrepreneurs, Episode 8. In this episode, we are joined by a clinical psychologist and a dear friend, Batetshi Matenge. We will talk to her about the entrepreneurial mindset, cognition, and emotions in entrepreneurship. Batetshi Matenge has a master's in clinical psychology and has been practicing for a few years. She's registered with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa and with the Board of Healthcare Founders. She offers both brief, supportive, and long-term psychodynamically orientated psychotherapy, which means that she focuses on both short-term and long-term thinking and behavior patterns that ultimately lead to long-term breakthroughs. She has also worked through various incubators and accelerators. Batetshi, it is truly an honor to have you on the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mmathebe, and good morning to all the listeners.
We live in a world that is increasingly requiring entrepreneurs to anticipate changes, to respond accordingly, and to develop a mindset that allows them to do so. Can you tell us a little bit more about this mindset and what entrepreneurs require to navigate this changing world?
So I think that, what is important to always think about when we speak about an entrepreneurial mindset is to break down that sort of umbrella term into really small and tangible skills that make up the entrepreneurial mindset. So in my mind, what comes to my head as we're speaking is skills like perseverance, skills like learning, your ability to learn from experience, your ability to face reality, and adaptability skills. Yeah, and I think that's what comes to mind at the moment, and flexibility, right? And I think that this is really important for entrepreneurs to really harness these psychological skills, because that's what makes a difference in terms of the successful entrepreneurs and the unsuccessful entrepreneurs. What this requires of entrepreneurs is to really get in touch with their own minds and to understand and have a realistic appraisal of their strengths and of their weaknesses. And one of the other things to also hold in mind is just how sometimes someone who's highly resilient, highly motivated, independent, a self-starter, it's always important to also realize how those can sometimes be a weakness. So as much as they're your strengths, it also sometimes gets to a point where you need to analyze and think about whether in a particular situation, those are not actually your weaknesses in that moment. So I think that sometimes it gets a little bit hard because people are surprised and say, well, this has always been a skill of mine or a strength of mine, and I've always been good at this, but why is it that in a certain situation, it's then crippling me? So I think that's what comes to mind when we speak about an entrepreneurial mindset. It is a set of psychological skills that make up one's unique entrepreneurship sort of a landscape, if I were to put it like that.
I like what you're saying around flexibility, adaptability, resilience, and really being able to navigate a whole amount of change, because truly speaking, entrepreneurship is really a long journey that is ambiguous and typically requires a person to adapt to change. And, one thing that I find very interesting is that our thought patterns do, in fact, impact entrepreneurial behavior or behavior in general. In your view, given that entrepreneurship is quite an ambiguous journey, what are those thought patterns that can lead to some people being able to spot new opportunities and opportunities worth pursuing and actioning it throughout their entrepreneurial journey, and others not necessarily being able to do so?
The thing about entrepreneurship as well, and I think that you may agree with me on this one, is that the different, obviously, schools of thoughts about entrepreneurship. Things like, can anyone be an entrepreneur, or only a certain group of people can be entrepreneurs, etc. And that makes it very hard to come up with a sort of blanket statement of what those cognitive thoughts are that allow others to spot opportunities or to really succeed in entrepreneurship. But I think that what's important to speak about is that each person has a very unique sort of frame of mind, and each person has different experiences, life experiences that have influenced their development of their mind. And what is critical is for an entrepreneur to really go down that journey and understand themselves, and understand their minds, and understand their cognitions, their patterns, their vulnerabilities. Because once you have that information, then you are able to have a look at it and say, okay, so this is actually what's going on here. And then you are able to then say, if I want to achieve this and that and that, then I need to address this part of my thinking, this part of my mind. Because, and I often say this to my patients, is that, which is a bit scary to them, is that, 98% of what drives us in the world, of our life drive, is dictated by unconscious processes. So actually, we only really are in touch with 2% of who we truly are. And that's absolutely crucial for entrepreneurs, because the journey is absolutely, it's very personal. It's a you thing, it's all about you, and you are the leader, you are the driver for that business. And it's really important for you to have a sense of what is my mind? How is my mind made up? And with that information, that will give you more insight into how to navigate your journey.
I like what you're saying, because, in entrepreneurship theory, we talk about expert scripts. These are higher order thinking patterns that are essential to entrepreneurial thinking. They're really about the ability to see connections, as you mentioned earlier, to create new combinations from normal resources that exist just in the normal world, to staying mentally focused and really connected to building a new venture, as well as to improving, your entrepreneurial ability through experience in starting a new venture and dealing with failure. I like what you're saying around being able to be aware of your own mind, and really being cognizant of your own thinking patterns. How important is mindfulness then, as a practice, and the ability to be conscious in developing these higher order scripts that we talk about?
So it's absolutely essential to work on that. I didn't even know that that's what the theory says, that you need to make links. Yeah. And part of psychotherapy is really actually about understanding, having a sense of your mind, and then starting to make links. So when I work with patients, I help them make links in sessions about, what happened yesterday and what happened 10 years ago, for example, and what that means for you in reality and today, and in the choices that you make and in your behaviors. So I actually wasn't aware of that. So that's something new that I've learned. But mindfulness, when we speak about mindfulness, that's one way of getting access to your mind. There are different ways of, harnessing your ability to pick up those links and to understand those patterns. And mindfulness is a great tool to doing that. So I think that it is important, and it's a useful skill, health skill, for entrepreneurs to actually learn and practice and so on, because it allows you to really focus and be in the moment because as an entrepreneur, you're constantly juggling paradoxes. You're constantly managing decisions, choices, and every choice, every decision, there's almost a loss with it that you have to bear. So having the discipline of really being in the moment and focusing on whatever it is that you need to focus on at that particular point is absolutely crucial.
I like the fact that you're saying mindfulness is one of the tools, to really be in the moment, to reflect on your own thoughts, to reflect on yourself. How important then is it for the practice of mindfulness to extend to the environment around us? So understanding what an environment impacts us, because entrepreneurship requires an ability to act and actually influence, our environment. We know that most entrepreneurs' thinking patterns are influenced both by the individual thoughts, which is pretty much what we're saying in terms of self-reflection, but as well as the cultural factors in their environment. So how does an entrepreneur coming from, for example, poverty or rural area in South Africa, India, etc., adopt an entrepreneurial mindset?
So when you speak about poverty, actually, poverty is one of the greatest assaults to the mind, because it really sort of limits one's capacity to explore their minds and different avenues that their minds can go to. Someone is almost in that space of, a survival mindset. And from the little that I know about entrepreneurship is that a survivalist type of entrepreneur is not the kind of entrepreneur that, most people would want to invest in. You want to invest in a growth entrepreneur, someone with a growth mindset. And I think that in some ways, poverty or hard experiences really hardwires certain psychological traits, which are actually quite positive for the entrepreneurial journey. And, that's where you develop your sense of resilience, your sense of perseverance, your ability to be tenacious in the face of really adverse effects. But I think that because sometimes that's what helps you survive and get out of your environment, you then start carrying that into different environments. So, and what's important for entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs who've had really tough lives, is to engage in that process of self-reflection and also explore other ways of their being and immerse themselves in experiences that perhaps they never experienced before, they had the opportunity to experience, just to engage in some kind of lateral thinking and challenge the hardwired limiting beliefs at times that one has set for themselves.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying, Batetshi, because, firstly, entrepreneurship is about, self-efficacy, the ability to just believe in yourself. And really that carries people through. And, depending on how your environment then impacts you, you're then able to develop those coping mechanisms that allow you to thrive in that particular environment. But the point you're making around, self-reflection and taking stock of what new thinking patterns you need to be engaging in to move forward, I think is very, very important. So I think we do agree that entrepreneurs think differently from people who are not entrepreneurs, and they therefore have these certain cognitive biases that enable them to become entrepreneurs in the first place. And so in the last sessions, in the last few episodes, I spoke about how entrepreneurs tend to overestimate their chances of success, for example, and how they undervalue the level of risk they assume. I've seen that as an investor, entrepreneurs are likely to convince you that your money is going to come back. It's going to triple. In fact, when you invest in them. So in your view, what are the things that entrepreneurs can do to balance this over optimism, which is their fuel in the first place, without losing their fire? And in a lot of these experiences, for example, that shape their thinking in a hard environment as well.
And, and one other point that I think is sort of links to what we're speaking about, which is worth mentioning, is that oftentimes entrepreneurs that have really been through hard experiences, the one thing that they also struggle with is, the belief in themselves and that they're worthy of the entrepreneurial journey. So there's almost this imposter syndrome that they carry in their journey. So even when they do succeed, it's almost hard for them to face that and look at that and see that as an extension of themselves. So that's just one point, that I thought is important to mention. But to your question around how do you help entrepreneurs manage their over-optimism? And I think what I will go back to is what I mentioned earlier in this session, that one's capacity to deal with reality is absolutely crucial. It's a psychological skill that we need to practice. Everyone, every person practices it. We deal with it because reality is hard. Life is hard, and it's hard to really face or believe that actually what you are proposing may not always necessarily turn out the way that it is. And where the other skills come in there is that your ability to learn from experience. So if you keep sort of flocking this horse, a dead horse in that way, and saying that, no, this is going to make it, I'm going to make however billions of money out of this, without sort of facing reality and actually trying to incorporate that in your process or in your thinking, then that's highly problematic. So I think it is a lot to do with how can you start facing reality without necessarily sort of moving away from your level of enthusiasm and optimism about your business idea or about your business.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing to do. Hey, I mean, we must admit that it's a hard thing to do, because as an entrepreneur, your first instinct is to create, something that did not exist. And a lot of entrepreneurs struggle to hear the fact that some of their ideas may not succeed. Somebody like Steve Jobs, for example, we didn't have the iPhone before it was invented by him and Wozniak. So I think it's a balance, definitely. I think it's always a challenge to have those moments where you almost test some of those assumptions that you're making over time, and actually seeing whether some of them are being validated through either collection of data, your experiences, people around you. So I think there's a good space for data, as I suppose, in entrepreneurship, as well as self-reflection. Look, I think it would really be important for us to then go on to talk about the subject of just the mental effort that is required in entrepreneurship, and shining a spotlight on emotional wellness for entrepreneurs, because, Forbes reported that entrepreneurs are 10 times more likely to suffer from mental health disorders. What do you think this is the case? I mean, why do you think this is more likely to happen to entrepreneurs than people who are not necessarily entrepreneurs?
I think it's because coming up with a business or developing an idea and turning that into a product or whatever it is, and then running a successful business, it feels like it's about you in a way. And you're so closely aligned to that vision that sometimes it's very hard for you to separate the business from yourself. So your business almost becomes an extension of who you are. So when something happens, or if your business is going through a hard time, then it almost feels like it is you that is doing this. And you're struggling to separate yourself from that and saying that actually it is the business that's struggling, as opposed to saying, I am struggling or I am a failure. And I think that's why it hits them so hard, because it is almost an extension of who they are. Imagine as a parent, think about it. When you give birth, as a mother, when you give birth to this child, they in a way become an extension of who you are for a very long time. And as a parent, at some point, especially as a mother, at some point you actually need to start recognizing that this child is an entity on its own, with its own psychological makeup. It's a human being. And actually, it's not necessarily just my own mirror. And so I think a similar process happens in entrepreneurship, where entrepreneurs really struggle to separate the business from themselves, and they see themselves in the business. And I can see why then it's so hard-hitting when a business fails, or it doesn't succeed, or it doesn't pan out the way that you had anticipated. But I also think that the other sort of vulnerabilities that entrepreneurs have is what we mentioned earlier on, is just sometimes they're so resilient that they've survived so much. And it's merely that. It is survival. Sometimes it's not a real processing of whatever experiences that they've had. And it's almost like this black hole is created where all these negative or tough experiences are sort of just dropped in that black hole. And then at some point, your mind can't deal with all of that. Your mind needs to process stuff. It can't deal with all these encapsulated sort of pockets of pain in your brain. And then your mind collapses. And the thing about the mind is that, you know, it's a bit of it's catch-22, because your mind will take you as far as you need to. So if you need to develop certain like defense mechanisms, like not facing reality because of your environment, it will allow that for a certain point. But at some point, your mind will say, okay, now we are no longer in that sort of environment where you need to always survive. Now you need other psychological skills and tools that you need to develop. So I'm going to now take this away. And then you're left sort of defenseless. And now you have to almost start all over again in terms of creating a way of putting yourself together in the world, in your mind. So I think that something happens where entrepreneurs get to a point where it's just not sustainable to continue in the way that they've been operating. And they don't have the skills to manage their psychological and mental health. And one other thing, the third point, is that I think, you know, entrepreneurs are not very good at self-care. They're not very good at taking time out, because there's often this a sense that, you know, I can't take time out. I have to be on the business. I have to work on the business 24/7. But actually, that's not healthy. That's not helpful for you as an entrepreneur and for your business. It's actually the responsible thing to do, to take time out. And especially for entrepreneurs who are working in communities, so social entrepreneurs who are working with people and they're solving social issues in the community, you have to actually also have that sense of responsibility that, you know what, a lot of people are relying on me in this way, and I need to also take care of myself and take time out. So I think that those are the three reasons I think that entrepreneurs really struggle with their mental health.
You know, you've just provided so much invaluable insights. It's very difficult to capture it and say, you know, and summarize it. But what I want to do is unpack the component of, you know, that black box that carries so much resilience, and where there's so much that has gone in there over time. And the thing about it is, you know, certain entrepreneurs, and I've seen this as an investor, certain entrepreneurs will probably use the same tricks, you know, over a long time that have helped them get access to critical capitals, to other capitals in entrepreneurship. So for example, the aspect of getting financial capital by pushing your way through, or, you know, positioning yourself as somebody that is really overconfident or pushing your way through. So the point you're making around not stopping, not reflecting, and not necessarily unpacking that black box of resilience is so important, because at some point that does not work. You know, at some point you are not able to gain the financial capital or convince somebody to come work with you through the same behavior that has worked all along, you know. And so I think for me, it's quite important what you're saying in terms of being able to stop, pause, reflect what has worked, what has not worked, and how you can actually change your behavior to become a better human being. I think that is probably the most critical component of being a self-reflective entrepreneur. And just in closing, I just want to then focus our minds on the practical tools that entrepreneurs can then use to equip themselves in terms of maintaining an entrepreneurial mindset, but also, you know, maintaining healthy emotions. So if you could just help us through some of those practical tools? I know we spoke about mindfulness earlier, but some of these deeper reflection issues, how do entrepreneurs tackle them or take them on? Whether it is committing themselves to lifelong therapy or committing themselves to mentorship. What are those things that you think could help entrepreneurs both in their thinking as well as in their emotional well-being?
Yeah, I think principle underlying that question is really about entrepreneurs also seeking support from the external world. It's very important for them to realize how to find support from people that you trust, and find support from different processes. So, like you said, there is psychotherapy, and I know that I think, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what psychotherapy is about, right? There's often an extreme understanding of it, that the only people that go to psychotherapy are really severely distressed individuals. But actually, psychotherapy is another form of, or a tool of self-reflection that absolutely helps you hold yourself accountable to your actions, to your behaviors. And it also helps you open up an avenue of a different way of being and opens up choice. So one of the biggest things that I've come across in my work with entrepreneurs is that, and just not entrepreneurs, with all kinds of individuals as well, is that because of those laid down cognitions and thoughts that we've developed over years, is that there's a sense or a proclivity to thinking that one only has very limited choices or options, and what's often mind-blowing for me is to actually help them understand that no, you don't have to respond in that particular way. There's so many other ways that you could have responded to that scenario. But because of their experience, they've only really had access to very limited choices and ways of being. And it is about expanding that and expanding your mind and your awareness. So really any process that helps you immerse yourself in any kind of reflective process, like I said, psychotherapy, mindfulness, meditation, and coaching, mentorship, and also constantly asking or seeking feedback, critical feedback from people around you, and relationships, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I think that, entrepreneurs need to understand that their network is highly important, and the people that you surround yourself with know you best. And it is also about asking those people for feedback, just in terms of how you engage with people on a day-to-day basis. It can produce a lot of information about who you are as a person and in the world. So I think that any process that requires you to engage, to reflect, to expand your imagination and your awareness and your creativity, then I think those are the things I would say entrepreneurs should expose themselves to.
I just like that whole point around having more choice, because entrepreneurship is about seeing multiple possibilities, and if you're able to foster choice in your own mind, emotionally, how you respond, and, ultimately how you behave, I think that is really connected or correlated to the ability to then see various opportunities in the environment and to see various combinations of resources that could result in new value propositions. So I think as an entrepreneur, if it's not for anything else, I would definitely commit myself to psychotherapy for the ability to just open up choice and a plethora of ideas that are then available to you. And it is an important tool to be able to just reflect on yourself, work on yourself, because it does impact the relationships that you spoke about. It does impact, your ability to really create meaningful social networks that are not just only, avenues for you to monetize your business, but avenues for you to grow yourself. And just my last point, particularly on something you've mentioned around social networks, is oftentimes I think entrepreneurs see social networks or social relationships as an avenue to gain access to resources, for their particular businesses, which is fine. And I think in entrepreneurship theory, we also see them as that, but I just wonder, how else could we use those social networks to become this avenue that you're talking about, because it does take trust, and it's not necessarily, always fitting to ask your investor to give you feedback on, your anger management or whatever issue you may be going through. Your pitch, So it's always tricky to almost look beyond those social networks as just avenues to gain access to resources versus improving yourself, taking feedback and developing genuinely authentic relationships through vulnerability. And I was reflecting on this in my previous episode to say it's very weird strange because at the same time, your investor is interested in a confident person, right? Somebody that believes that they are going to take this business to the next level and return the required ROI that the investor is expecting. In your view, how do we just start to push those social relationships a little bit more such that they open up this authentic, vulnerable self that is able to receive feedback and also grow beyond the financial resources?
No, I absolutely love what you're saying, and actually picking up on this point is how often people overlook the power that comes with social relationships. And for me, in my mind, social relationships are actually tools for personal development. So every social interaction that you have with people is an opportunity to learn more about yourself through the other person, and just in your particular way of being with the other person. So I think that people need to have that understanding and be mindful of that any interaction I have with someone is an opportunity to grow and to get to know myself even better. And that is what personal development is. And I think that it's important for people to be intentional about it. Have a group of people that you trust, that you feel like you can always go to, and be vulnerable with them, and really state what you need from them, and use that vulnerability as a way of fostering a trusting, authentic, meaningful relationship, but also as a way of getting to know yourself.
I love that because I've been able to see that, for myself in just having known you for these years as well. You haven't psychoanalyzed me, thank God. Thank you for that.
Thanks for mentioning that.
But I think it's
everyone thinks I go around psychoanalyzing everyone, and I'm just like, no, I actually don't. You don't pay me. So.
Well, I'm not paying you. So I think it's incredible. Yeah, I think it's incredible because it's really creating that space with people you can trust. But also having an approach to growing as a person, and I suppose in adding value in the other person's life as well. So thank you, Batetshi. It's been absolutely incredible. Such beautiful, amazing insights that I think as entrepreneurs we need to hear a lot more, and I think we need to engage in these conversations a lot more. So thank you for that. Thank you for being on Wellness for Entrepreneurs.
Thank you for having me, and I leave having learned quite a bit about entrepreneurship as well.
Thank you for listening to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast, a space for meaningful conversations with founders. Please click on the link below to subscribe and follow us on our social media channels. Goodbye.